The Kurultai of Sindh Kitar. Reader's note: at this point in his presentation, Tom K. flashed the icon of Kunirama into the minds of his audience. Sindh Kitar had united his people during that first year of the Trojan War. In 2708, fourth slave of the third dusk, he called for his confederations for a 6-day event in the steppes to coincide with Saturnalia. Every tribe had sent delegations, representatives, chiefs, and holy men to witness. Each day was to begin with mighty competitions of music and sport, to be followed by a play, and to end with a great feast. Sindh Kitar was surrounded by a retinue of no less than 10 soldiers wearing bronze full plate, whose spears were adamantine. He himself had brownish tan skin, green eyes, and fiery red hair. He wore a crown of mithril and was draped in dragonhide armor. He came brandishing a wood steel sword and a dark wood bow, complete with silver-tipped arrows. He wore many magical rings, and his cape's color was said to reflect his mood. He was always accompanied by his daughter, Dawn, a powerful sorceress whose eyes were like that of a pure light which would pulsate through the colors of the rainbow. He was well served by his sons, one actually born of him, but both raised by another, who had taught his people a better horsemanship and sailing. The play itself was a piece of propaganda. Sindh Kitar had called it the history of the world, and it was a culmination of all the different mystical traditions of his people, as well as their best guess as to the real-world history of this plane. However, it was reimagined to put Sindh Kitar at the center of the cosmos, to spread his message and way of rule. The play itself was silent. The only spoken dialogue throughout was from the chorus, who were dressed as the three Norns, who would summarize the events of the thing at the start and end of each day. The characters would sometimes wander off of the stage, with the audience following. Sometimes it was the real thing being witnessed. Other times it was actors. Usually, the two were merged via spirit acting. One important faucet to note: all the women were played lasciviously, and almost all the men of Sindh Kitar wore a pendant bearing Kunirama's icon. On the first day, Sindh Kitar came upon the stage, surrounded by his bronze men, but now there were 2 mice crawling all around his body. Soon, they were followed by actors who were dressed up as the other leaders in the Trojan War. Soon, they were accosted by Rakshasas, played by real Rakshasas. Sindh Kitar and the Rakshasas had fought, but then he had made motions and gesticulations that seemed to calm them. The group, the leaders of Kurukshetra and the Rakshasas, then wandered through the 7 ecologies of the Rosistan, evident by stagehands holding and swaying pictures of flora and fauna. Soon, the troupe came to a fountain surrounded by a serpent. This serpent, the crowd knew, was Iblis, and not only that, but Iblis had done this favor for Sindh Kitar by playing himself. Sindh Kitar had gone to Iblis and appeared to whisper in his ear, offering him a sacrifice that the audience does not see. Iblis slithers away, and the troupe drinks from the fountain. But a fight breaks out amongst them. Eventually, the troupe had outwitted and outfought the Rakshasas, exiling those they did not kill. Intermission. Then, Sindh Kitar appears with his wife, though his skin was painted blue, and she was painted green, and her hair was dyed pink. It was said throughout the day that he would be called father, and she would be called mother, from the point on that the sign was given, though none were told what the sign was. Sindh Kitar called forth his daughters from the audience. First, Dawn appeared before Sindh Kitar. Then the next came, after Dawn had prepared the way for her. She revealed herself, for the first time, to be an avatar of Pilar, the Sun Lord, in all her radiant might. Then, Sindh Kitar called forth his steed, which all knew to have been a gift from the nature pantheon. With the slightest and subtlest nod of his head, his bronze men had surrounded the thing and cleanly cut off its head. Sindh Kitar's wife then started to gyrate, slowly stripping away her clothes. It was revealed that, yes, every strand of her hair was pink, and every inch of skin was green. When she had become naked, she mounted the horse and she rode it to completion as the audience watched. When she had finished, Dawn performed a spell, and Sindh Kitar started to rise, watching in the sky. He pulled out magical arrows that Dawn had made for him, that became lightning bolts when fired, and shot them into the horizons. The bronze men now moved to the periphery of the stage, and for the remainder of the play, stood so still that the audience came to forget them, to look at them as theatrical decorations. The avatar of Pilar came underneath her father. He pointed at her, and a surge of light came. The two had become interlinked, and what she would see, he would see. For the remainder of the play, he would fly over the center silently and somberly. The mice would jump from him to the trees, crawl down, and then crawl back up, jumping to him, and report what they saw. End of day 1. At the start of the second part of the play, Sindh Kitar pointed at a pair of twins, one named Man, the other named Yemo, so named as he was an avatar of Yama. Both were unique amongst the audience as they were already wearing a pendant of Kunirama. It had been passed around the day before that Sindh Kitar had actually sired one of them, that he and their father had sex with their mother on the same day. All stared in awe, wondering what would happen to these summoned before them. Then, Sindh Kitar, as the sky, seemed to enact the ritual of parental binding between himself and the twins. Footnote: I will give an interpretation of this part of the play, for I see bird people, lizard men, ant men, snake people, insect people, seaweed men, and more in the audience. Being aliens, they do not have the binding ritual in the way that we do. Sindh Kitar was not insinuating that he had parental jurisdiction over these two because he was the biological father of one, for this notion of genetic connections is not a concept that mortals have, for that is an animalistic and alien notion. Instead, Sindh Kitar was insinuating that he had parental jurisdiction for the same reason a dragon or god might, because he himself was a mythic figure. End footnote. Dawn cast a spell on Yemo, making him the size of a giant. Slaves brought forth pictures of waves and boats, holding them underneath the twins on stage. They are accompanied by a cow avatar of Althumbla. Here, the three pointed at stars, which were just paintings on the ceiling of the stage, and mimicked navigating the waters. Here, they came across a being waiting in the water, made of a smokeless fire. They journeyed the plains, and encountered dogs that guard the underworld. Intermission. The twins then rode on horses, showing the audience the way to treat and tame the horse. They found a third man, who they had fought, and then reconciled with. The three fought a wild owl bear, and it was a live fight. They encountered a group of lizard folk, who were real lizard folk, who bowed before them and scurried away. Then they came across a group of dwarves, who each bore the mark of Sarek. First, the trio and the dwarves angrily gesticulated at one another, and both sides threatened to unsheathe their weaponry. Soon, however, Yemo had made a move, and those present embraced. The dwarves revealed a magical hammer that could shatter the ground when used, and it really did. They presented it to the third man, who becomes known as Thunder Hammer. End of day 2. The next day is notable for having 3 intermissions. The 2 twins appear. They are the same people, but they have aged many years. They are seen building something great, but soon, creative differences turn into heated exchange, which turns into violence. The 2 battle with both magic and club, but eventually, Man murders Yemo. The audience breaks the silence with a gasp, as this was not staged. Intermission. Man walks with the avatar of Althumbla, walking onto an empty stage. He appears shocked at what he sees, or rather, what he doesn't see. He searches far and wide for his brother. Eventually, he stumbles across Yemo's carcass, and there is a Kleepoth, which has managed to manifest itself so well it can be seen. It is like a floating shell, a shell in the shape of a cratered skull. From the front comes a sharp beak with a serpentine tongue, but no eyes. On the bottom of the shell slides out tentacles, barbed at the end. The Kleepoth is clearly performing necromancy on his giant brother's body, but Man has a magic ring that he uses to enchant the Kleepoth. He appears to charm the thing, and slides his hand into it. Suddenly, the Kleepoth disappears, but now Man's hand becomes a sickly black, and it may never be used again. Intermission. Now, Yemo's giant carcass is on stage, but he is dressed as a king. Clearly, there are men hiding behind Yemo. Before him stands Man, dressed as a priest, and he is grasping the avatar of Althumbla by a leash. The cow is clearly apathetic to what is happening around her. Man moves his mouth, but nothing comes out. He waves his hands in the air and starts trembling. As he does so, men dressed like priests come out of the cranial area, and men dressed as warriors and kings come out from his breast and arms, and men dressed as commoners come out of his thighs and groin. The astute observe that the commoners are the only men not wearing pendants of Kunirama. As this happens, the body starts to decay until it is no more. As more men come onto the scene, it creates a distraction, and Man walks off the stage, but none notice that he leaves. The avatar of Althumbla stays where she is. The men start to fight each other, the priests and warriors on one side, the commoners on the other. Slowly, without the audience noticing, one or two dwarves bearing the mark of Sarek fight side by side with the commoners. But a powerful commoner goes to the side of the priests and warriors, as some warriors move their ways to the common section. Soon after this, a priest reveals himself to be a starved ascetic, and jumps in the middle of their battle. All stop in their awe, and watch this man perform a ritual dance. They join hands. Man comes back out with a jagged jade dagger. He ritually sacrifices the avatar of Althumbla. Slaves quickly place flowers and wheat on her body, and they release animals such as rabbits and deer as she is slaughtered. End of day 3. For the feast that night, the Kurultai ate the remains of the avatar of Althumbla. It is noted that this was the last meal Sindh Kitar ever shared with his people. It is said from that point on, he only drank mead, soma, and nectar. He only ate ambrosia, pomegranates, and gilded apples. However, it seems he's still engaged in the hunt with his men. The next day is notable for its lack of intermission, and for its abrupt scene changes. Thunderhammer is tending to his cattle, when a group of bandits accost him. They burn down his hut, they rape his daughters, and they make off with his herd. Thunderhammer goes to the underworld, battling the dog that guards the entrance. He visits Yemo, though it is clearly an actor, who shows him a vision of a king. Thunderhammer goes to this king, pleading before him. The next scene, there is a lion on stage, and Thunderhammer fights it. This fight was real, and many feared that Thunderhammer would not make it, as this lion seemed to be immune to his namesake. Eventually, Thunderhammer manages to strangle the thing. The next scene, Thunderhammer stumbles across a fire which has over it a roasting chicken. He looks for the owner, and unable to see one, he begins to roast the chicken over the fire. In a fairly comical way, just as he goes to eat it, it disappears. He jumps back stunned. At this moment, he notices something the audience could swear was not there a mere moment ago. A flask of wine and an ancient instrument. Thunderhammer begins to play the instrument, and it drowns out the ambient noise the audience was so used to. As he plucks the strings, the bass's shield falls off, revealing itself to be some kind of percussion machine. The beat it plays complements the playing perfectly, and Thunderhammer's fingers begin to bleed. Soon, a string snaps, but it mends itself. The head of the instrument starts to sing a song, one of the few instances of words being used. As this plays, a beautiful woman comes on stage and watches Thunderhammer. When he has finished, she approaches him. She sits next to him and they become intimate. Thunderhammer hands her the wine and points to Sindh Kitar in a praising way. As he does so, she falls over. She writhes in pain and eventually reveals herself to be a demon. Thunderhammer captures her with a lasso and rips out her heart. The demon turns to ash. The next scene, Thunderhammer finds the bandits from earlier. However, now they are chained, and they are carrying signs that indicate them to be some kind of papier-mâché dragon. The audience hears murmuring from the back, for the mystics are chanting. Slowly, these bandits start to turn into a giant serpent, only to flash back to bandits holding signs. Eventually, they stop oscillating, and stay as a serpent. Thunderhammer hits the beast in the head with his hammer, and it dies. End of day 4. The next day, one starts out with a man dressed as a king. He is shown to be a kindly and just ruler, and he is shown to train his sons. His daughter has no suitors. An oracle comes and wildly points towards the sons, but he does not heed the oracle's words. The sons, however, realize and quickly banish the daughter. They brew potions that make their father become blind and feeble when he consumes it. She later gives birth to a son. The son is shown to be a promising champion, and we see him battle many dire beasts as he ages. Soon, he comes back to his homeland, and he slays his uncles and frees his grandfather. Intermission. We see Thunderhammer once more, now with a son. However, he soon leaves this area, going on to do bigger and better things. We see the son grow up, and he fights all the things fought so far in the story. However, he is clearly fighting actors. The battles are clearly staged. Instead of real bleeding, the actors simply throw red ribbons whenever they are struck. Instead of a real lion, the lion is a slave wearing green paper holding a papier-mâché of a lion. Now, Thunderhammer's son is a young man. He joins the band to go out and fight, and on the other side is Thunderhammer. Soon, the two duel, and the rest of the stage clears, focusing on just these two. Thunderhammer is using real blows, while Thunderhammer's son is stage fighting, and none of his blows are real blows. Thunderhammer starts to toy with the young man, fighting with less prowess than he usually does, and sometimes even mockingly throws out red ribbons as the young man bleeds. Eventually, Thunderhammer becomes bored, and slays the young man. End of day 5. The next day we see a powerful king with a gnome at his side. The gnome has clear markings of a former slave. It acts inappropriately to the court, and it profanes the priests. The king appears to protect the gnome, though at times he does rebuke him. The court, the priests, and the people are unsatisfied with the king's relationship with this gnome, but the king is just and powerful and keeps enemies at bay, so they tolerate it. But then the gnome plays a trick that results in many dead heroes. The king becomes depressed, and his court exiles the gnome. The king is shown to be hurt by this act, but accepts that the gnome has gone too far and must be punished. The gnome, on the other hand, has become bitter and hateful. He comes back disguised and slays the king in his sleep. The gnome then sits on the throne and wears the diadem. He becomes a cruel leader, and he knows no modesty. The crowd cannot help themselves but jeer and heckle now, breaking the silence. Intermission. The gnome is shown eating a feast and wiping his face with what appears to be sacred scrolls written in Draconic. Then, from the periphery, the bronze men come to the foreground. Despite never having left, the audience has almost forgotten their presence. Then, Sindh Kitar comes down from the sky and slays this gnome. Sindh Kitar walks around the 6 corners of the earth. He encounters vampires. He encounters dire beasts. He encounters aliens. Those who are not killed walk with him. He finds actors dressed as his enemies in his war, and he slays them and takes their husbands and wives as his husbands and wives. He rules over all. The crowd cannot help themselves and burst aloud with cheer. The play is over.